Oh, oh, oh. Good evening and welcome to The Caring View, the online social care chat show available on YouTube and all major podcasting sites. We are on LinkedIn, we are on Twitter, we are on Facebook, and we are now officially TikTokers. So don't forget to subscribe, give us those likes, give us those follows, give us suggestions for upcoming episodes. If you are watching this for the first time, the views we express tonight are of our own and not our respective companies. And we are powered by Care Stockroom. Care Stockroom is a fantastic company that provides all sorts of products to the care industry, and they're run by people who actually believe in social care themselves. Fantastic people. So thank you so much, Care Stockroom, for making this show possible. So tonight we sit here, and I apologize, I'm not in a button up. And I am sweating and I just look gross, and I've got my wicked fan with me. Tonight, Mark, we are talking all things social care. So good evening, Mark, and good evening, guests. How are we all?
Yes, good evening. I'm good, thank you. Good evening, Amanda, Lucy, and Alison. How are you all?
Hot. All really good. Hot, but
yeah,
good,
thanks. Warm.
It's like that awkward sort of thing, isn't it? It's like when it's Christmas and everyone, or it's coming up to New Year and everyone just can't wait to go, see you next year. And it's like that sort of thing. Everyone just wants to get that whole sort of, I hope you're keeping cool in nowadays, isn't it? It's like that. Let's start with a ground, like ice-breaking joke. So before we get started on talking about tonight, let's do a quick round of introductions for people to get to know you all. So Alison, we'll start with yourself.
Hi, my name is Alison Vale and I am based up in Scotland, so maybe bringing a bit of a Scottish perspective tonight. I work for a family business. We have been on the go for 35 years and I'm 34, so it's definitely been in my blood from the start, but yeah, interesting how things have changed over time. So yeah, based up in Abbotsford Care in Fife, which is lovely Scotland, near where the Open is, if anyone wants sort of geography kind of terms at the moment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alison. And great to have Scotland here representing. Always a bit Eurovision-y when we've got someone from a different country in. Scotland calling, coming in. Amanda, how are you tonight?
Yeah, I'm all good. Got a fan on, staying cool. So, yeah, I'm Amanda. I'm a quality director for a large provider of support and care to people with learning disabilities and brain injuries. And I am so old, I can probably remember everything that we're going to talk about. I'll be ferreting around in my brain because memory's not as good, but I remember all of these changes coming in one by one. So I'm really looking forward to tonight.
I thought that was going to become a bit of a self-roast then. I'm so old that such and such and such. I thought you were going to start telling us some jokes.
I just remember it all. It seems, and you know what? It feels like just yesterday, some of it.
Wow. And if you don't already follow Amanda on LinkedIn, please do go check her out because really great posts that go out on a weekly basis, daily basis from Amanda. I've been a huge follower for ages. So yes, go and check out Amanda on LinkedIn. Last but not least, Lucy, returning guest. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks.
Who are you, Lucy?
Now I ask myself that some days. Yeah, Lucy Buxton. I work for myself, got my own business, so I do some consultancy work because I'm a nurse. I started in social care a very long time ago, so 32 years ago. But I'm also a master coach and an NLP trainer. So I work with either businesses or individuals in social care to help them achieve their goals, grow, evolve, let go of their stuff, and that's me. And a bit like Amanda, I guess I can remember some of the changes going back. And I guess right from a little one, when I used to go and visit some of these long-term care places with my mom and my nan, and then I saw it from being a care assistant at the age of 15, and I've just given away my age for those who can add 32 and 15.
Honestly, thank you so much for joining us, Lucy, tonight. So before we get into the discussion of tonight, which is social care throughout the years, we want to have a look at how social care has changed quite drastically over such a short period of time. Mark, I wonder whether we might look at any current news, anything going on at the moment that we might be aware of or need to be aware of that's happened recently.
Yeah, there's been a bit. So obviously today's announcement is around the NHS pay rise. So they've announced that the lowest paid staff, so the frontline Healthcare assistants are going to get up to 9.3% increase. Doctors are going to get 4.5%. Paramedics and midwives are going to get around £1,400 of an increase. So I think it's great for NHS workers. I think it's truly deserved. I think it's just going to hinder social care's recruitment and retention issue. There's a lot of talk about how they can resolve social care and the issues and the NHS and the issues they've got. And actually, I don't think that he's going to help at all. It's not going to fix social care anytime soon.
I am going to say with my tinfoil hat now that when the NHS bosses came out a couple of weeks ago and were saying, oh, social care should be at least £10.50 an hour. And I know, Mark, you and I rebut this quite a lot going, £10.50, where's this number coming from? When I went and checked the NHS wages, actually the healthcare assistants in the NHS were only on around like £9.40. But surely this 9.3% increase is actually not going to take them too far off around a £10.50 basic wage. So I do wonder whether NHS chiefs have been aware of what the pay rise bracket was going to be for them to start calling out for social care. But this is not to put a divide between us and our NHS brethren. It's, we're just annoyed that there's still no progress here for social care. So yeah, I completely agree with you on that. Anything about the heat? It's so hot. And I remember as a care manager, even in normal weather, it was difficult with hydration and keeping people safe. We've now got post-pandemic guidance of wearing masks. Is there anything out about supporting people during this heat whilst wearing full lots of PPE?
Just before we come to that, just regarding how much an hourly rate of the healthcare assistant is going to get paid, it's working out it's going to be around £4 extra than they're currently on. So it's going to take them to around £13.50 per hour. So there's not many social care providers that are going to be able to compete with that at all. With regards to the heat, there isn't much out really. So the Department of Health and Social Care did their Twitter update. It was like 4 really badly worded, poor grammar. I don't know if you've seen it. It's atrocious. Literally, drink fluids, stay inside, and whatever the other 2 were. And yeah, I don't know. Amanda, you're obviously closer to the front line. Alison, have you seen any kind of guidance to support anyone?
Not an awful lot. There's been very little. There's the usual heatwave plans that come out. We do run with some information that we do push out. Today's the hottest day. Yesterday was the second hottest day. And we did have an inspection in one of our care homes. And the CQC inspector was highly critical that we'd not taken the people we support out on activities in the middle of the day, which just seemed ridiculous to me. Unbelievable.
Well, clearly she hasn't read the heatwave plan, has she?
Absolutely, yes. When we get the formal feedback, I will be sitting in on that, I will tell you, and I will have a say. But no, there is very little out there. Additionally, conflicting information from different departments around things like the use of fans and everything else. Differing. But then that's no different to what we've had for 2.5 years, is it? Conflicting information.
Alison, anything from you in Scotland in terms of guidance?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I've just had a little person come bounding through the door. I knew that it was going to happen at some point, so we started off early. In terms of guidance, the Care Inspectorate did put out some guidance, which is equivalent of the CQC for us. But one of their instructions was try and have additional staff to support you during these times. And we were all a bit like, where are we going to find them? When COVID's not something that's happening, obviously. And I think we had what I was doing yesterday was actually traveling around our 8 care homes in Fife with my 2 little people, delivering ice lollies to all the residents and all the staff, just trying to do what we can. But I think there has been very little kind of specific support, I would say. A lot of it is kind of wives' tales, and I tell you, the best one we had was the cutting the grapes in half and putting them in the freezer because they go mushy but not solid. And I think that came from one of the great WhatsApp groups that's going around giving helps and tips and advice. So that was really helpful. I think the network of each other, what works in your care home, give it a shot and we'll try it everywhere. I think that seems to be the gist of it at the moment.
Anyone who likes frozen grapes, just put some jelly powder on top before you freeze it. They taste so good.
I think that's the wonder of social care, though, isn't it? That we actually get more information from the people working in the sector than those that are supposed to be leading and guiding us. And, you know, Amanda, I can't believe CQC actually said that. For me, I would be arguing this just re-solidifies my view that they don't run autonomously. They run off a script and they can't deviate from that script. You know, it could be blowing a gale and a tornado outside and they'd probably still say the same, why have you not taken them out on an activity? And I think that's where, Alison, I don't know whether it's same with the CI up in Scotland, but I think that's where the regulator fails, is the fact that they struggle to deviate from plan, whilst also actually coming across terribly biased. It doesn't come across unbiased at all. Jane Borland's just said in the comments, networks are so much better for advice, and it's so true. And in fact, let's talk about networks. So tonight's show, we're talking about social care through the years, what's changed, how have things changed, and it all came from a conversation we were having in a WhatsApp group, a cocktail WhatsApp group, believe it or not. I think it was, wasn't it, Mark? And I think, you know, that was really interesting to go, oh, what a really good idea for a show. So, Mark, tonight's show, how has it all come about? Tell us the conversation we've been having and what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Yes, you're completely right. It did come off the back of the Cocktail WhatsApp group. So if anybody wants to join that, please just let us know and we'll add you in. Yeah, it was just an off-the-cuff comment. I think it was regarding last week's pre-recorded show. There was some gremlins in the system and it wasn't live at the right time. And I can't remember what the comment was, but it sparked a bit of a conversation about, actually, it'd be great to do a show on social care and the history and bits and pieces. And everybody on here tonight expressed an interest in joining. And here we are. I think, like you just said, it's great that actually a conversation like that from a WhatsApp group led to a show actually raising awareness of social care, where it is now, and possibly what it's doing in the future.
So before we get started, we do have someone who joins us quite regularly on the chat show. He sits in our comments quite a lot, called Carl. Now, Carl has lived in social care for a good portion of his life, and I did ask him whether he wanted to be a part of the show tonight. And he's asked actually that I read his email out rather than him be a part of the show. I just think it's important that we hear it from someone's perspective who lives in care and has experienced from. And Mark and I know Carl. When I say no, we know Carl. We know Carl's story quite a bit because he does tell us often of what he's experienced, and it's quite horrific. You know, the stuff he experienced a number of years ago whilst in care, which we wouldn't even hopefully dream of happening nowadays. I mean, I know we've had Winterbourne and similar scandals. So in the 1970s, Carl's mum was deaf and worked as a home help care assistant, which then changed to home care. She adopted his disabled cousin, who's now his brother. She retired in the late 1980s due to ill health, but when her mother, his grandma, had 2 strokes, it was decided that she was to move in with Carl and his brother. But the pressure was too much on her own health and disabilities. Oh, sorry, the grandma was to move in with them. The pressure was too much on his mum's health and disabilities, coupled with raising 2 disabled boys and looking after her mother, his grandma. So to give his mum a break, it was decided that she would move into respite care. But on the day that we were supposed to collect her, and that was collecting his mum from care, his grandma died. So when he was 23, he was forced, and I will stress the word he used is forced, into making the decision to move into residential care at the age of 28. And he'd already, and at the age of 28, he'd already moved into his 3rd care home with the same provider. And Carl's never left care since. Carl's still in care to this day. And this is something like 25 years later. And he's struggling to find, you know, this independence identity of I personally believe, and I don't want to put words in Carl's mouth, if Carl was going through this situation today, Carl wouldn't be living in care, I don't think. I think Carl would be in a supported living accommodation. I think Carl would be supported to be living independent. But I think that's a byproduct of what the system was like a number of years ago, and the understanding of being able to support people with learning disabilities and that infrastructure. So Amanda, I want to come to you first, and I know we joked about talking about the 1948 National Assistance Act, and actually we're going to go to the 1990s community care reform plans first. So what has changed? How has care changed in this last 30 years? And which, by the way, when I say 30 years, I always think like, 1960, but actually 30 years takes us to the beginning of 1990, doesn't it? Which is bonkers nowadays if we think about it. So how has care changed this last 30 years?
I think I would go back myself, probably 40 years, only just for a bit of context. So I started my nurse training in 1982. And the very first ward I went to work on was a long stay geriatric ward. That was what it was called. And that was where people lived out their days, people who had disabilities, unable to support themselves. And there was the town that I was in, there was a hospital block. And I think there were 8 long stay wards there, and that was the norm. There was what we used to refer to as Part 3 accommodation, which was, if people remember that, the old local authority accommodation. And then there were those genteel homes for people that didn't really offer any care. It was just a community living for people that could afford it. So all long stay care was delivered in these NHS wards. Over the 3 years I did my nurse training, there were some changes then. And I remember thinking very proudly, we're delivering a different sort of care now, because we moved from Nightingale style wards to compartments. So they'd have a compartment with a curtain over the end. But the care and standards, looking back now, what we thought was excellent was absolutely horrendous. You wouldn't imagine it. So a cupboard where the laundry people would drop off all the clean wash clothes in the morning, and it was a case of first up, best dressed. So you'd go to the cupboard and you'd select a pair of pants and a dress. Or if somebody was incontinent, a dress with a split up the back, and you would sit them on a chair with an Inco pad and no underwear. And then periodically through the day, you'd stand them up and change the Inco pad. And we thought we were looking after their incontinence care. If I fast forward through to the end of the 80s, for those of you that will recall, there was the Griffiths report that looked at this sustainability and the long-term care. And out of the back of that came the Community Care Act. And in late 88, I left the NHS. I had a baby, and I just decided, as my maternity leave was ending, I'm not going to go back to the hospital, resigned, and I went to the nursing home down the road. I knocked on the door Thursday afternoon about 4 o'clock. I said, have you got any nurse jobs? And the matron, because it was a matron then and very hierarchical, invited me in, took a few details and said, can you come back at 7:30 tonight? You've got a job. Can you do 3 nights a week? So I went back at 7:30. Somebody gave me a brief run through. They handed me the keys and off they went, and they left me there. No checks, no nothing. And I guess, that is a key illustration to me of, it doesn't reflect the care, but it reflects how this industry has grown into this massive, I don't know even what you'd call it. There are so many people who direct what we do, how we do it. And there are no choices left in what we do. We spend, I really believe we spend probably more time ticking boxes to be compliant than we do delivering really good care and support to people. And that's really sad, because although we didn't have the compliance standards, yes, you'd probably have heart failure that had no fire safety induction. There was no safeguarding. They left me with the set of keys, 34 people and a team of people I'd never seen before. But you know something, I know I left that shift and all those people had received really good care and support. I had eyes on every one of them. I met every one of them. If I went as an agency nurse to a 30-bedded care home now, I doubt I'd be able to do that because of the ticks and the checks that you had to go through. While I was there was when the Community Care Act came in, and it was at that point, the people in the care home I first went to, majority of them went funded by the state. I don't know whether Lucy will remember this. They could turn up at the door, hand over what used to be their benefits book. So they'd hand over the pension book and their, would it be income support or something? They'd literally hand over the books, and that would be sufficient ordinarily, and you'd claim a bit more and pay for it. And then that Community Care Act came in, and that was the point at which the responsibility, to my mind, went to the local authorities. The assessment started. And I remember being at a providers meeting where the conversation was such that this is where the cost saving comes into play. And within 6 months, I remember it was one of these trade organisations locally, like a care association. I think it was up in the northwest somewhere. And I remember the man that was leading it saying, this is where the cost cutting starts. He said, in 6 months' time, we'll be buying smaller sized chickens, smaller sized joints, using lower wattage light bulbs, and we'll be watching every penny. And how true that was, you know, from the point that came in, that Community Care Act. And we've just been driven since then. The changes in between, we're driven by legislation, cost cutting, and somewhere in the middle, we've lost the people that we support. So that's where I've come from. I don't know if that's of any help, or Lucy, I don't know whether you remember those days.
Yeah, no, definitely a help. Lucy, it'd be good to get your take on your experiences.
I grew up as a little girl. My gran would have been what we probably now call like an activities kind of therapist in one of the wards that kind of Amanda referred to, but more potentially what would have been going back to the 1800s would have been asylums originally. So as a little girl, I'd go in and I'd see all these people who'd been put in this place for just like horrific reasons. You know, they were pregnant out of wedlock, so they just locked them away because that wasn't socially, you know, acceptable. So I can remember seeing these people and obviously watching my nan and my mum trying to knit and sew and do stuff with them. And then I guess I watched then how, like, after the Griffiths report was done, and there was a really awful event in one of these hospitals in Wales where they kind of saw all the horrific abuse that was going on. And then obviously, you know, we then started to see people transition from these wards. And it was at that point I started as a care assistant, and very much like what Amanda said, I thought, you know, I was working at Dillon's, the newsagent. I was getting £1.60 an hour and I couldn't stand the owner. And I just thought, no, I'm going to go and be a carer. And I wanted to be a nurse. So I just turned up and I said, I want to be a carer. And I was 15 and that was it. I got a job. There was nothing, there was no checks, there was no training. You know, I'm 15 and I'm moving and handling people manually and doing Australian lifts, for those that, you know what they were. At 15, when my skeleton was still developing and I was still growing, and I was, you know, people would move up that bed so quickly, you'd almost put them through the wall. And then seeing how all these people then came out who'd been in these wards for such a long time, and again very hierarchical. So matron wasn't a registered manager, wasn't registered with anybody. The inspectorate would just turn up and say hello, and you'd have a cup of coffee, and off they go. But the nurses, you'd have to call them sister, and they'd have their, you know, their cuffs and their caps, starch caps on, and very, very different. And I can remember feeling very lost and very unsupported, and actually seeing stuff which was quite horrific in some ways. And then I fast forward to now, and it is exactly like what Amanda says, so many ticks and checks and boxes. You know, I can remember I stayed, and when I went off to do my nurse training, and I'd work part-time on my weekends and stuff. And I can remember seeing this catheter come out of this one person, and the nurse turned around and said, well, you're a student nurse, why didn't you just put it back in then? You know, it was like you wouldn't even consider that today. It just wouldn't even happen. And back then it was something that was constant. And the place I went to work was it was a squash club where the owners weren't making the money as a squash club, so they thought they'd convert it into a home because they were going to make money. And ultimately making money out of people, I suppose. And the actual resources and the knowledge and the training and the education that we now know people need to be able to give care effectively and safely, it just wasn't there. It just wasn't there.
I'd like to say I'm shocked about this whole converting the squash club into a home to earn money, but I have a lot of conversations with people around, you know, why they should be coming into care, why it's a viable career option, why it's so wonderful, why it's fantastic. And the amount of people who are suited and booted who'll go, and we must remind people that actually you can make a lot of money in care as well if you open up your own home. And that's still the mindset. It's still this mindset that actually, you know, care brings cheese, care brings dosh, care brings really good profits to you. And it's that mindset we're trying to differentiate from. We're trying to step away from that. So I'd love to say that's changed over the years, but I think what we found, especially with Four Seasons finally going under and putting the main bulk of their portfolio up for sale, is people come in this to make a profit, realize that actually there's not much money in it unless we're being cruel and charge people too much or get the investors involved. And that's where we get problems as well. But no, thank you so much, Lucy, for sharing that. And Australian lifts at 15, madness, absolute madness. You know, I remember as a manager, I would go mad when people wouldn't use a handling belt. And I don't think handling belts are accepted in most places nowadays. Alison, Scotland, your family have been in this for 30 plus years now, and obviously it's you've grown up with it. So what are the changes you've seen from your home's first opening until now, and especially in one of our devolved states?
Yeah, so I think, you know, in some respects, the progression of social care in Scotland has kind of moved with England, but we've really gone at different paces at different times. And I think what I really recognise is my mum and dad actually were living in Brighton at the time, and they were working in a care home in Peacehaven around that area. And my mum was working there as the nurse. And she was like, hang on, there's nothing like this up in, you know, where we were from. So they decided then that, like, you know, maybe we could do this and we could do it better, and we could take it up to Fife where we were. And that's really how it all started back in 1987. And I think that the ambition for them was to be able to provide that care in a way that they hadn't seen anywhere else in Scotland at the time, you know, that it wasn't really on their radar anyway, and where they were from. And at that point, there wasn't the same number of care services in the area that they kind of built, but now we're overrun in quite a small place, have got a number of different care homes. And I think, I mean, the biggest thing that I recognise is having grown up in care homes and really grown up. I mean, there's pictures of me at 2 years old staring down the eyes of a lady who was a resident with us then, and kind of that whole idea of how care has really changed in terms of who the residents are as well, and how that progression of people who came to us then stayed a lot longer. They were with us for a lot longer because they did come a bit earlier in that care continuum in their journey. And I'm a big advocate that I think communal living can be a really positive place for people who are older in particular to be integrated and socialising and living their best life in some respects, to be involved in that environment. And I think now what the biggest change I've definitely seen more recently is that huge shift of people who are no longer able to engage in the same way because they've been staying at home, you know, that push for home first policy. And although that's positive in a number of ways, it does mean that our care communities have really changed and shifted, and how and the needs of the individuals that we're caring for is dramatically different. And I would say that my mum and dad have always mentioned that that's the biggest change that they've seen. You know, before, when they first opened, you would have Jean, who could come in, who could wash and dress herself and support her own self, but she was a wee bit forgetful. And now you're much further down the line, and unfortunately Jean can't talk to you, she can't tell you what she needs and what she wants, and the impact that has on the whole community, and the impact that can have. But yeah, it's a very different place. And I think in terms of the really important aspects of shaping care, I think we've really been focusing on the integration between NHS services, and I think what I've seen even in the really recent history of the last 2 years is that's taken its next massive leap. And no, I'm kind of talking about the future, I suppose, in some respects, but I suppose we can't reflect to the past and not think about how it's going to impact us. But there's so much that has been changing in these last couple of years about how we respond to each other, from those initial stages, you know, back in 2002 when we had the Community Care Health Act, about those sort of ideas of integration and how that's been pushed as a rhetoric, but it's never really gotten over the bat. And how do we now think about how we revolutionise that again for the next stage of where we go?
I think you've raised a really good point about, you know, the future, and it's something we need to think about. And we've actually had a comment that we wanted to bring in from Jane. I'll put up on the screen. So Jane's mentioned that people are coming into care homes now with more complex healthcare needs than when she first started 25 years ago, and now almost expected to be medically trained, which I think is everybody's nodding, you know, it's a fair comment. You know, actually, we're not paying our care workers anymore. They're getting more skills, and, you know, Amanda, I'll come to you because I know that you do both health and social care, don't you? Because you've got nurses within some of your services. Are you seeing an increase in kind of the leads coming in?
Yeah, I think absolutely we have. I think one of the key issues for me with this is there is a bit of a lag between the changes and the developments we've seen through the pandemic. And actually, if you look at the pure context of the Health and Social Care Act, which governs how we manage our homes, pre-pandemic, had we had people with that expectation of doing some of the monitoring and nursing tasks, we would have probably been absolutely penalised. But now it's crept in through the back door. We've actually developed a really robust delegation of clinical tasks policy so that we can make sure we can clearly identify that at the end of these clinical tasks that are being delivered, there is a clinician that owns them. And we don't accept that responsibility for that task unless we actually get somebody to own it up front. Now, that's quite often we have to go through our legal teams to say, we're more than happy to do this task. It could be in administration of injections for insulin. It could be medication through a peg tube, because when you look at the best practice and things like NICE, actually they do need to be owned by a clinician. And this is where the integration of health and social care is falling down, because we shouldn't have to go to a legal team to speak to a health authority's legal team to say, hey, can you own that? We're willing to deliver that with no extra payment or anything. We just want somebody to own it. And I think it is absolutely true, Alison. I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of people's need. And I do feel that the registration, and especially those registration categories, in some locations you will find people doing things that would have been done in a nursing home 10, 15 years ago. So there is a bit of a lag, really, I think, on how we're regulated. Nearly every GP was asking support workers and care workers to do temperature, pulse, blood pressures. We wouldn't have done them pre-pandemic, would we? And now they're the norm, and they've put the medical these oversight in from healthcare leads. Yeah, I just think it's just very sad. The other thing is, it comes down to funding, doesn't it? And that synapse between when do health start paying and when do social care stop paying. And actually, if we just take a dip over into the LD world, and you look at there is that national aim to get people out of long stay mental health institutions, I'm going to be really brave and say majority of the time it doesn't happen is because social care cannot afford to pay providers the rates that health were paying for the stay in hospital. And it's that link that doesn't go. It's just another example, I think, of I'm really trusting and I'm being believing and I'm positive, and I'm going to be hoping onto that hope that when we see these integrated care boards up and running, that we see things working correctly. I've got everything crossed.
You see, when I was a provider, we've done this. We did it for at least the last 5.5, maybe 6 years. We would always do blood pressures. We would always do oxygen levels. We would do temperatures. We would do pulse. We would do the lot, so that when we actually phone GPs or our nursing teams or whoever, we'd be able to go, these are the stats, these are what we've observed, and it would help them triage. And it was fine in our area because it was a sort of like a local initiative. This is how we can help reduce the burden on the NHS. But what we didn't see is it was a sort of an inception into, let's do more in social care. We're not going to get any more benefit from it. We're not going to get paid more for it. And now what we find is people question the validity and the credibility of the care homes actually doing this. It was fine during a worldwide pandemic when people didn't actually want to come into our care homes. Do it now and people are going, but what training have you had? Have you been trained to use an oxyometer? Have you been trained to use a blood pressure device? And there is that sort of hierarchical, egotistical outlook on it. These integrated care boards, I'm with you, Amanda. I'm skeptical, to say the least. I'm hoping they are going to be productive, but I've spoken to too many where we've had local authorities who have expressed that they are themselves enough of a voice for social care on the board. And that's concerning because social care needs an independent voice now. There needs to be a voice separate from commissioners, separate from providers. Alison, I see you nodding. ICBs, ICSs, what's it like in Scotland? What's your integration landscape like in Scotland? Are you as skeptical as us, or are you in the NHS like, besties up there?
Right. So we've been kind of living in the joint integration board kind of space for a while. So I think it was around like 2014, we had the kind of initiative of the joint integrated boards. And that's something that has been well established in Scotland. How successful they are, I suppose that's why I'm kind of like, don't hold out too much hope. Because I think, yes, there are benefits to it, but I definitely think that we haven't got it right there yet either. And I think there's loads of room for improvement. And part of the idea in Scotland of a national care service is about trying to think about how those things could be much more intuitive and kind of really working together in partnership in a way that is Nicola Sturgeon's and the SNP party's kind of rhetoric for kind of power at the moment. I mean, it's really difficult because I think that the intention is there. But one of the biggest issues I kind of have is that often the social care providers aren't necessarily represented. So in the Joint Integrated Board, I'm part of, like I've watched a few times because they are public, which is another good thing. So you can just like spend your day listening to that in the background while you catch up on your emails. But it's very bureaucratic. There's a lot of different hoops and things that people are jumping through, giving reports on different areas. Does it make a difference to us on the ground in terms of what we do? I'm not so sure. But what has happened in the last 2 years of the pandemic is we have formed incredible relationships in the locality I'm from, working with the NHS. Now, that's not representative of the whole of Scotland. I want to really, really clear that in case anyone's watching and be like shouting down the phone at me. The reality of it is that Fife, where I'm from, has really focused on partnerships, relationships, and a relationship particularly based on trust with the social care providers and those that are working really hard in the sector. And I think that that's really where all these things fall down, is because there isn't the trust. And as you kind of commented, Adam, the idea that like we've been doing all of this for ages, now you're going to come in and tell us we're not doing it good enough. Well, where were you? Where were you when we needed you? Where were you? Where are we going now? What is the progress of where you wanted to take us? And controversially, maybe, I think it's something like the care inspector or the CQC unannounced visits that really add to that culture of mistrust. And until we change the fact that, like, as care providers, we want to be prepared to see you, to support your visit, to make change if change needs to happen, we don't need to be jumped in on because you don't trust us to do a good job the whole time. And I think that that's, really frustrating from my perspective.
I think you've made a really good point there about the care inspectorate and the CQC, and actually the inspectors need to be more of an ally than somebody coming in just telling what you haven't done. I know the CQC was either the end of last week or beginning of this week, they will kind of merge into one. They did release their new standards and kind of their vision for the future, didn't they? And that was one of the ones for the CQC, that actually they want to have more of that working relationship. But they've spoken about that in the past and it's never materialized. But yeah, I think we've got our fingers crossed for a lot of things. And I think for me, my fingers are crossed because actually we all know when you've got a really good supportive CQC inspector, life is so much easier. You can just pick up that phone and ask for advice.
And that's where the inspectorate fails, though, isn't it, Mark, if we're completely honest? And I'm not going to shy away from the fact that I think CQC are not fit for purpose. We've invited them a number of times onto the show. We've invited them a number of times into conversations. The fact that we still say to ourselves, it depends on your inspector, just shows how shoddy the entire system is. It should not rely on an individual. It should be a blanketed system across the piece. And the fact that we have to say to people, oh, it depends on, unless you've got a good relationship with your inspector, it depends on whether your inspector's understanding. It's rubbish. Sorry, Alison, I think you wanted to come in there.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest changes that I know I've seen in the last 2 years in particular, in terms of the history of where social care has been. It used to be so competitive. People used to compete, in that sort of marketplace, money, etc. You wouldn't share your ideas with another provider because that was deemed to be, no good. You would be keeping it all into yourself. You would be doing your great work, but you wouldn't share it outwardly. And that has changed. And I think that that's changed with people like yourselves. You're sharing what you're doing. We're collaborating a lot more openly. And I think that makes a huge difference. And I think that then renders someone like the CQC a bit redundant in the care inspector, because actually what would be better maybe would be peer-to-peer kind of inspections or peer-to-peer support groups. And how do we shift that narrative? Yeah.
I'm just looking at the time, and I think we sit here and we go, oh, look how much social care has changed over the last sort of 30, 40 years. Hasn't time flown? We're 40 minutes into the show, and I can't actually understand how fast we've got to where we are. I mean, there's comments in the chat saying, yes, we agree. Been doing clinical obs for years. Yeah, we pay for CQC, and yet they do nothing apart from pull social care down. Very little support from them. And some love from the chat, which is very, very nice. Mark's pulled us together a timeline of a brief history of care and support law. So we've had a number of laws and guidances coming up into social care in the past. Obviously, we've got the Care Act, which changes frequently, and we have amendments like the care vaccine mandate put in and taken out quickly. These laws, these guidance changes, these regulation changes, are they any good? Do they bring any sort of benefit to the sector? And Amanda and Lucy mainly, I think on this one, are any of these, do you remember any of these making any sort of tangible difference to social care? I'm going to come to Lucy first because she's smiling.
Well, it's a really interesting one. So the Health and Social Care Act 2001, thinking back to how things were, we were talking about those long stay Nightingale wards and then the bays. I can remember going to care homes pre-2000 where they were like stately homes and they actually had wards in them. So if you think about like a National Trust property where they had a big lounge, what would have been the big lounge with the big fireplace, and they probably have 12 or 18 beds in them with just not even a pull-round curtain, but the wardrobe and the bedside cabinet splitting them from the next person. So that, to me, on a buildings perspective, is the one that really jumps to mind because it's something that's really visual. You know, buildings have to be, new builds have to be very different now. And it's not as easy to go and take an old property and convert it because it's going to cost you a fortune to do that. That, to me, I think, is massive. If I think back even further, you know, when the Griffiths report came out, and there was a statement he had said something about the fact that social care was the second unloved cousin and not a baby. So kind of saying nobody really kind of took ownership for, you know, social care or those people. And actually, is that really the case still now? Because what we're saying is, you know, you can get on and do it in a pandemic, and then afterwards we're just going to come in and, you know, regulate you, inspect you, rather than actually taking that relationship of ownership of the baby and saying, this is what we're going to do, this is how it's going to improve, and we're going to work together collaboratively. So I'm not so sure then how much has changed.
Amanda, what about yourself? Because I mean, we've got the obviously direct payments quite visible on those guidances and law changes that had come in there. I think if we ask anyone who's in receipt of direct payments or wants to be in receipt of direct payments, I think they would say it's all phooey because it's still not a perfect system and things don't work properly. Has there been one individual law or a number of laws that you think actually, yes, this has really benefited social care, or do you think it is all just wordplay?
I don't know that I could say that there is anything that I would 100% agree has benefited social care. I think there are parts of individual pieces of legislation that have been of benefit. Again, go right back to the 1990 Act. I always find it highly amusing when we read a lot on social media about people saying, well, we shouldn't have private providers, they're just there to make money. But you go back to the 1990 Act, and actually it was the government made that decision to allow private enterprise to step into the market. And for anybody that was around then, we went from no care homes to a care home on every corner, and care homes like Lucy was talking about, with as many people shoehorned in as possible. And I remember working nights in that type of environment with 3 elderly people, no dignity, all in one room, in divan beds, knee moving and handling. So there were parts of that because I think it took people out. So there are little elements that have got us to where we are now. Because I think for all the negative you read, I think when you do find providers and you find individuals who've got a real focus on delivering individual quality care, and there are people out there who do it really well, what they're delivering are all the little snippets of the good out of all the best practice and all the legislation that's come through. I think if you go back to the national minimum standards, if you remember them back in the early 2001 time, they were the first time that people were really prescriptive. And I think that was the start of this very prescriptive standards-based auditing that we see from the regulators. You know, if I go back then, and I remember when they started dictating how big rooms could be, I remember doing relief work for a bank who were minding and looking after all the services and all the homes that had gone into liquidation after being bought in the beginning of the 80s. By 2000, they're all going bankrupt because of the impact of other things. And I remember seeing providers taking skirting boards off walls to try and hit the size for the minimum sizes for rooms. So I think that kind of thing, the care standards, the national minimum standards, they have driven higher standards. But on the other side, they've driven this regulatory approach which confines us and restricts us from delivering really great care. So I absolutely can't say there's any one piece of legislation that's made a difference, but I could probably pull together my definition of quality care born out of individual snippets from different parts of legislation, which when providers use well, you do get good quality outcomes for people. Interesting about the direct payments, I have a real theory, and that makes me so mad. I think that has all been an academic exercise. It's never been done with people at the centre of it, and it has been done with so many hurdles. And, you know, you talked at the beginning about your gentleman that comes on and watches these shows. At what point was he offered a direct payment to live independently? So absolutely, whatever money was spent at that should have been spent on improving outcomes for people, because it doesn't work. We do not see enough people with direct payments. And in fact, you still see people now shoehorned into care provision that they don't choose. So a bit of a gripe from me, but there are good bits, but not one good piece of legislation.
I think it's a good gripe to have. I definitely agree with the direct payments. I think there was so much potential for it that we've just missed the mark on. But I think for me, when we looked at that timeline, I was really shocked that unpaid carers, it was only in 1995 that they were really recognised. That really shocked me when I had a look at that. I kind of thought that would have been a lot earlier on. And again, there's still so much more work that needs to be done with unpaid carers, and the rate that they're actually, the allowance and bits and pieces and respite, and so much more that needs doing. But yeah, I think for me, Adam, I believe you've got a slide that looks at the goals from 1989 that we can kind of go through.
Yeah, I just want to touch on something Amanda just said then about people removing skirting boards to try and fit into these room sizes. And I think we've struggled to find an identity of what a care home should be in this country, of what a place of care should be in this country. And we've got houses that Jack built, we've got purpose-built places, and each have their own sort of benefits. But I always say that, a cinema and a spa and an ensuite bedroom does not a home make, and nor does a home full of just wonderful staff when actually everything's falling apart. I don't think anything so far has really supported a freedom of what a care home should look like inside. And I think that's because we don't fully understand what a care home should be. And it's a difficult thing to try and put a regulation on, because at the end of the day, it is someone's home. And it's how do we put these bare minimums in place when actually we've got an aging population, yet King's Fund and Lang Busan are saying that the demand for care homes is reducing. And if the care home demand's reducing, should we really be investing in them at the minute? But then we also can't discharge people from from hospital to care homes, but that's not because we've not got enough staff. And it's so difficult. I think sometimes we put so much red tape in place and there's so many loopholes to jump through that we limit ourselves in innovation and creation. I'm yet to see something myself drastic in the last 15 years that the government has introduced to bring around real change. But yes, the 6 key objectives of caring for people. And by the way, I know this sounds like I'm being really negative about social care tonight. Social care is a wonderful place, you know. The negatives we've got about it are the handlings of it from our government, not really from the people within care itself. The people in care itself, 99% of them are absolutely incredible. The organizations, they've got heart, they've got soul. It's a wonderful place to be. We just need people like Gillian Keegan and Steve Barclay for however long he's going to be in post, and whoever's going to be in post when supposedly Rishi Sunak will take up leadership. We need them to listen and them to put some heart into social care now. But until they do, it's up to us in the sector to actually do that. It's up to us providing the care, living in care, relatives of those people to actually bring that change now. So yes, there's some doom and gloom, but we are overtly positive about social care. So please don't misunderstand tonight. So yes, Mark, 6 key objectives for people.
Yeah, I think reading through them, I think it'd be good if we went through each one by one. I'll read them out just because I know that if you're watching from a mobile phone, it might be quite small. So the first one is to promote the development of domiciliary, day and respite services to enable people to live in their own homes wherever feasible and sensible. Now, I think for me, I'll come to Amanda, Lucy, Alison after for your opinion on this one. I think for me, there definitely has been development of domiciliary services and respite services. There's so much more we could do with respite when you kind of look at kind of what Denmark's doing, what America's doing, that, you know, and I think it comes back to what you just said, Adam, around legislation around health and safety and fire regs, and that it just restricts us. But I think the pandemic has accelerated the domiciliary market. People are obviously too worried to put loved ones into care homes. They'd rather keep them at home now. But I think this was a good goal from, you know, when was it, 1989? I can't read it myself. 1989. So I think that was a really good goal, and I like to think that actually we've achieved that. Lucy, I'll come to you first on the first one.
So, yeah, I'd agree with that. I've just spent 5 months actually working with a huge acute trust on a Home First project, actually getting people out. And the benefits to the individual to actually be able to go home have been immense. And going back to what we were saying earlier about the complexity of people's needs now being so great. So yes, fantastic getting people home in their own environment, around their family, family being able to be involved and having the support of, you know, therapists. So, you know, goal and outcome planned, rehab and return to home, and then integration with, you know, adult social care, so funding, and then being offered direct payments. So that's great. But what I will say is the fact that it's not necessarily being about the individual, more about the pathway out of hospital to create the bed in hospital, and not actually focusing on necessarily the need and the right place, right care for the person, which I think that's where there's the disconnect for me. So lots of people I'm seeing who should or who would be far better cared for in a long-term environment are still going home, and families not even been given the options or the choices or the education. So yeah, it's nice to see we've made those differences and those changes. And after somebody who, I nursed my own mum at home, so I know from first hand what it's like to actually care for somebody in your own home and the benefits it gave us as a family. I still think, like I say, it's got to be about what's the goal, what we're looking to achieve here. Is it about the person, or is it about the process? Is it about the getting them out of the bed? And is that about acute hospitals actually learning about social care?
Thank you very much. I was going to come to each of you, and I'm very conscious of time, and I think we're going to run over. But I'll go to the next one, and I'll go to Amanda on the next point. So the next point was to ensure that service providers make practical support for carers a high priority. Amanda, what's your opinion on this? Do you think we've met this one, or we still need a long way to go?
I think that depends on who the provider is. I think that we are seeing a real shift. And the reason I say we're seeing a real shift is when you look at, talking for England, the way CQC are regulating at the moment, there is a lot of focus going on what carers, if we're talking about paid carers in the employment of providers, I am seeing a lot of focus at the moment on what carers say. And actually, I went and had a look at the Chloes. Now, they're going to be gone, but I had never twigged, because I have got, when they say it's all great, we'll accept that. When they don't say it's all great, then a provider needs to do some soul searching and see what we're saying. But go back to what we were talking about earlier on, and the fact that we have a lot of angry people at the moment. We have people dissatisfied after the pandemic. When the regulator asks some carers, they don't get it, that the negative feedback is not always justified. And I think that, yes, some providers are doing it really well. I think the approach that CQC are doing will force other providers to do that well, because where they are making regulatory judgments based on how people feel, and that word feel is in the Chloes about 40 times. So if staff feel they're not supported, at the moment, that seems to be being used by the regulator to inform the regulatory judgment. When you look at, the care ratings assessment, where they give you an identification against each one, which is really interesting. So sadly, I really hate to say it, I think in some respects, the application of the legislation may be pushing some service providers. But that said, there are some amazing service providers out there who get it really right. And although you mentioned funding at the beginning as well, in terms of the NHS, it isn't always about money. Sometimes you can provide practical support and it does not have to be financial. Somebody who feels supported, feels secure, knows that they're looked after is equally as valued as somebody who receives more money. So yes, I think we are getting there. Interesting that this goes back so far though, and we're just still not, we're not 100% there. So didn't do very well, did they, in 1989? Still not there now.
I was just thinking that myself, Amanda. This was the year I was born. And we're still having these conversations now. And I'm thinking, why were we talking about this back then? And we're still going, have we achieved this yet? Honestly, sorry, Mark.
No, you're okay. And I wonder whether, I actually really struggled to find what the original goals were. I'll share the link in a minute into the comments box, but I really struggled, and I wonder whether government officials actually don't realise what the original goals were. Hopefully they're watching this and now they'll know. But I think, Amanda, you raised a really good point around the Chloes. I think that's going to be a big kind of turning point for providers. I think a lot of managers have only just got their head around them now, and it's all set to change. And I think you talked and touched on, actually, good care doesn't need to cost anything. And I'm going to dig out the video I was watching on TikTok last night, if I can find it, around the token reward system they use in places like China, and I think there was a few countries listed, I think Australia was one of them, where actually they're now rewarding people for giving time to the elderly and the vulnerable, and actually can take this back and be rewarded for actually that time. And actually, I think that's something that actually in England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, we could actually easily adopt. The third point, Alison, I'll come to you. So the third point is to make proper assessment of need and good case management to the cornerstone of high quality care. What's your thought on that goal?
I think that for me, this is one of the real key places where I think we just haven't quite got it right in some respects, because I think if we were looking at that as an objective of a provider or those are within the social care, understanding assessment needs, good case management, care planning is the high quality care. That is what, when it works really well, it's because the staff really know that and they have a good understanding of that. But I think taking it back, the thing that I don't think we've worked out yet is actually where the social work department has their assessment of needs and their good case management, and how that if they don't have that understanding and that knowledge about an individual, the whole process doesn't fall into line. So for me, I think we've done it well within the providers and within the services. They've really focused on person-centered care that helps support that. But we need to have more of a combined understanding of assessment across all, whether it's England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. We all need to know, because sometimes social work speak a completely different language from the people who are actually running the services, and that disconnect is really what can make things much more complicated than it needs to be.
Thank you. I think for me, the assessment process, I think we went through a stage of doing it really well. And I said I'd only go to one of you. I'm going to bring Amanda in, because I think actually we've gone the opposite way. Actually, assessments have got worse. I think they've become a tick box exercise. They're done over a phone. We're missing people's life history. they're pulling through wrong info because they're just using systems and the systems haven't been updated. And actually, you get the assessment in front of you, and it's not a true reflection of the person that you're about to provide support to, and that's in both home care and residential. Amanda, what's your opinion been on the assessment process recently?
So I think a lot of people forget that for England, that the Health and Social Care Act states that you deliver your care and support based upon assessment, based on the identification of assessed need. So it is a regulatory requirement that we do the assessment. I am really, really firm across our organisation that assessment has to be done really well. I think that this assessment process they brought in during the course of the pandemic, where the assessments have been done in hospital and then handed over to the provider, they need to draw a line under that, because I have seen issues with incomplete, inaccurate, and frankly unsafe assessments that somebody's handed over and then you have to deliver care. I like the fact that the regulations do state you deliver care based on the assessment you've done. We will not accept I will not let anywhere I'm responsible for accept anybody if we've not done an eyes-on assessment. You can't bring somebody into a new environment to live without meeting them and knowing them. If somebody came and picked me up and sat me in the house over the road and said, you're going to live here now, I'd be like, what are you doing? But we're doing that to vulnerable people in our society. So we have to get back to it. And the assessment, again, you're really right, Mark. It should not be a tick box exercise. It shouldn't be I'll go and look at that person and I get all the information. That assessment has to start building that relationship, understanding that person's needs, understanding the risks, and then using that assessment to build the care and support plans. And they don't come in until they're done and everybody knows what they are. Because I'm sick and tired of seeing people going back to what Lucy said, trying to shove people out with no. How do you deliver care to a frail person with multiple needs when you don't know anything about them? Sorry, I bit on my hobby horse over that, but it is just so wrong. It is so wrong.
I sit on the fence with this a little bit because I don't mind assessments. I think for me, it's the purpose of the assessment, the data that we're collecting, what we intend to do with it, and who's collecting it. So I understand the need for trusted assessors, but I also question the reason behind them and the quality of them. So I will remember trusted assessors doing assessments for us and people being discharged to our care home. And we used to say people moved into our home, they weren't admitted, but they would come to our care home and the trusted assessor would like, yeah, they can mobilise with 2 people, they can walk, it's absolutely fine. And they would get to us and they couldn't mobilise with 2 people, they were full body choice transferred, and they were then at an unsafe discharge position where we had someone that we couldn't meet the needs of because their bedroom was upstairs via a stair lift. We couldn't get them onto that stair lift safely into the bedroom. And for the sake of our manager going out to do this assessment, which would have taken, 3 hours, we then had probably something that's going to cost the NHS hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds, whilst also untold distress to the person that we were supporting. So I think assessments are vitally important. It's just we need to change our perceptions of them and how we can use them to their full potential without them being this sort of tick box exercise, like you say. So to provoke the development of a flourishing independent sector alongside good quality public services. I feel if I come to anybody on this, I think I know what the response is going to be, but I'm going to come to Lucy. So what do we think? To promote the development of a flourishing independent sector alongside good quality public services, 30 years later or 33 years later, are we on course to have achieved this?
Oh, well, my NLP brain's kicking in here because this objective is just not specific enough. So yeah, it's flourishing with the amount of providers, there's loads of them. But is it flourishing in the quality of the outcome for the individual on receipt of the care? Or is it flourishing in the sense of the dynamic and the relationship between the provider and the regulator? I just think it's a bit too broad and it's not specific enough for me. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, I mean, yes, I think it does. And I think it also answers the sort of mindset that we were in 30 years ago when creating these things. I don't think the social care landscape was what it is now, I suppose, with that. Anyone else want to come on to this before we move on to the next point? Just pop your hand up and I can see it just in case. Oh, Mark, brave.
I think we've gone the opposite way. I think we haven't just made a flourishing independent sector. I think we've now got the sector that is taken over the local authority, haven't we? So actually now we probably need to rebalance it slightly and have a flourishing public sector as well.
Yeah, and I think we're also at a position where we talk about carers and we don't actually know who we mean by carers nowadays. Are these people who are employed by organizations? Are they family members? Are they unpaid carers? Are they private enterprises? You know, there's so many different terminologies now to the term carers in independent sector. That does independent mean organization? Does independent mean gig economy carer now who is out there doing it on themselves? And I'll use the term unregulated for now, but even though I think they hold a vital place within the social care infrastructure. But the landscape has drastically changed. So to clarify the responsibilities of agencies and so make it easier to hold them to account for their performance. Oh, Amanda, quality manager, I think you need to come in on this one.
Well, I think what's unfortunate is there's no clarity around what they mean by agencies. So are they talking about different agencies within the health and social care arena? Or are we talking about, because today you talk about agencies and we're talking about agencies providing a resource to provide staff. I'm not certain what they mean. If this means agencies providing staff and resource, I don't think there's any clarification around their responsibilities. And the way that, again, I come back to it, the way the legislation is set up, the responsibility sits with the provider to make sure that whoever is in your service meets the requirements of the legislation. I'm pretty certain, if I recall, at one point agencies were regulated. Were they regulated at one point? I'm pretty certain they were. I have a real gripe about care agencies. I have a real gripe with, because they can make a shed load of money off a struggling industry and they don't have any responsibility. And I can say that based upon fact and upon work that I've done reviewing agencies.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because I think agencies where once upon a day were quite prevalent have sort of dropped off the map, especially in post-COVID times. They're definitely not as prevalent in especially in our area, but it's whether they do need to be held to account. And I think when we talk about responsibilities of agencies for accounting their performance, I think we do need to lumber local authorities and commissioners into this as well. You know, you do say it's quite vague and we don't really know who they're addressing. And I know the Care Quality Commission is going to have the power to be able to regulate local providers, local authorities. This should have happened years ago. You know, it should have been to a point where the Care Quality Commission was looking at our social care commissioners on the same sort of level as they were looking at us, because the authorities would get away with bloody murder and we would get criticised and hauled over the coals for the slightest different thing. I think a running theme with these is they are very ambiguous and very vague, and, you know, 30 years is a long time for things to happen. And it's a shame we'll try and find some more information on this. If anyone has got more information on these 6 key objectives over the last 30 years, where there's been like a running update or a timeline of events, please do get in touch. We'd love to know. So, Alison, I'm going to come to you for the last one. So, I know this sort of legislation probably doesn't apply to Scotland directly. I don't know whether you make your own, make your own laws up. I feel like our government just kind of goes, this is what we're going to do today. So to secure better value for taxpayers' money by introducing a new funding structure for social care. Well, if anyone's following Gillian Keegan in the UK knows that the funding structure has been pushed back by 18 months. But where do you think we are with this, Alison?
So this is where Scotland and England differ most dramatically, because in Scotland we do have what we call the National Care Home Contract, and that is basically a flat rate for residential nursing care that's paid to every provider by the local authority if they're purchasing residential or nursing care. And in that sense, we do have that, like a very specific funding structure that you either go down the nursing care route or you go down the residential care route, and this is the rate you're paid. And there's no kind of movement on that unless you're delivering a very specialist service that the local authority is then commissioning for a specific reason. However, where we're at in Scotland right now is a really exciting time where we're all kind of going, hang on a second, this doesn't fit for purpose anymore. This isn't where we need to be. We need to be thinking more, really investing in the kind of new funding structure that's required to make sure that it meets the needs of what the servicing sector is now, because this was made, you know, a good few number of years ago now, where we didn't have PPE costs, we didn't have the electric and the social care costs that we are facing now in the business structures that we have, and we need to therefore revise the funding structure to meet that need. So yeah, it's interesting because I do think this is the one in particular where Scotland are kind of almost, there's been discussion about a local commissioning model like England has had or does have at the moment, and everyone's kind of going, oh no, we don't want that either, that doesn't quite feel right, you know, where do we go? And there's constant conversations and discussions, and that's the hottest topic in Scotland right now, is about how we're funding it and what that funding should look like to make it as more appropriate in terms of one of the biggest issues. The last final thing is that, like, the care provision of the local authority, they actually pay themselves more than they pay private providers, and that's a big bugbear. I know that's probably the same down in England, but it's a big thing that, like, if you have to pay yourself that, then you're justifying you're not paying us enough. So change it and sort it out. So yeah, that's a big thing in Scotland at the moment, is the funding and how we get that right. And we're hoping, this is where all the hopefulness comes in, that the National Care Service might give us opportunity to really and kind of mix that up a little bit.
So, I mean, you've ended on a really controversial point there, and it's something that Shadow Health and Social Care Secretary Wes Streeting in the UK has proposed, is a national care service. I know people are for it, people are against it. People don't know enough about what a national care service might look like. Social care is obviously heavily fragmented. Would it mean we lose our individuality and what makes us so wonderful? But will it unite us to a point where actually we've got more of a voice and more support, where we can get the same benefits as our health colleagues? I think funding is always going to be a contentious topic within social care. I'm not entirely sure whether we'll truly find the full answer to it, unless the cost of social care becomes taken on board by the public, the same as the NHS care, and actually becomes free to purchase for people. But it's interesting to hear Scotland's take on it, because in the UK it differs from location to location, but we do have the ability to barter. So if the local authority will go, actually, we're going to purchase your care for this amount, we would have the ability to go, but we can't provide it for that, and we can challenge you on that. It's only something that's been brought to our attention over the last sort of 12 months, but it's definitely there, but it doesn't take into account the fact that we are still paid pittance by local authorities, and their carers somehow are still paid in excess of £10 an hour in most areas, and most private providers can't. Oh, Mark, everyone, we are 1 hour, 12 minutes into this, and I would love to talk about this all night long. I think we need to do a part 2 at some point. I think we need to broach the topic of a national care service, and I think the natural progression for me from this show moving forwards is, what do we want the next 30 years to look like? You know, we've seen what's changed over the last 30, 40 years. What needs to change in the next 30? And I would absolutely love, open invite to you three to come back with us to discuss what we think needs to change over the next 30. But I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us tonight. It's been a huge insight into your own experiences and the type of care that Mark and I have never seen. Mark and I are of the same age, and we don't understand what came before us. So this has been eye-opening for us. It's been great to see the comments going off tonight in the chat. Mark, have you got anything you would like to add?
No, I think just reiterating what you just said, I think it's been a really good show to kind of learn the history of social care. Worked in it for 15 years, and I've never really thought about actually what was the original goals. I think it was great to go through those goals, see actually what was set. Actually, we haven't really come that far. And yeah, like you said, it would be great to have you three back to come and talk about kind of the next 30 years of social care. But just to say thank you very much for joining us.
So Amanda, Alison, Lucy, is there any final thoughts, any sort of nuggets of wisdom you want to leave us on about what we need to learn from the past of social care moving forwards? Alison.
Oh gosh, that feels like really weighted. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think what I'd like to learn from the most recent history is the importance of relationships in terms of how we've learned to trust and support each other better. Yeah, let's take that mantle forward and continue to work and network with each other, because I think that's the best benefit of the last 3, 4, 5 years.
Now, Mark and I will echo that until the sun goes down for its final time. It's peer support and network support is absolutely essential. Amanda, anything that we need to learn from the past moving forwards?
I think for me, the biggest thing, tying up with those 6 goals, I think, this will not be solved by one political party. We need an all-party commitment to social care, a joint commitment, because I believe a lot of the failings of these multiple initiatives are when we have a change. So we have a change, if Labour get in next time, everything that's on the table now will go. And I think until we get an all-party commitment to a common goal, we will never get there, because people will wipe it out every 4 years. And if you go back and look at the main timelines, most things are on a 4-year cycle. So this is all linked to the lack of a common sense of a combined goal. This is what we're going to do for people, regardless of what political party they support.
Oh, definitely. And I think you're so spot on with about it being an all-party thing. And I had the privilege of joining the all-party parliamentary group last Monday at Westminster, talking about the future of the social care workforce. And it was so humbling to be in a room with the Tories and the Labour Party talking about the same sort of goal. And although we were at a time when, and we're still at a time where leadership of this country is called into question and probably will be called into question for the next 18 months, everyone was still on this whole thing, whereas we don't know who's going to lead our country, but we do know what we need to achieve, and it's a brighter future for care. And there is an open consultation moving forward. So I think what we'll try and do at the Caring View is try and promote this open consultation as much as we can, so everyone can put their written and verbal evidence in. The more we get into these consultations run by the APPG, the more we can influence social care moving forward. So I think a spot on point, Amanda. Lucy, final words of the show tonight.
So there's 2 things for me. Massive collaboration. So huge over the 30 odd years, the change in collaboration from individual businesses, very closed mindset to how the sector is. And it would be lovely to see, that collaboration with the people with the knowledge who are in it every single day, working with the people who make the legislation and guide the money decisions, the politicians or the councils or whoever. But I think for the other thing for me, it's the massive improvement around the individual being in the care. So much I saw going back where the individual was not at the centre of the care. Now, we know this doesn't happen all the time, but for the majority of the cases, it is about the person. And I think that is the one thing that really shines out to me over my 32 years in care, is that it's about the people.
Yeah. And what a perfect note to finish on. Social care is about the people. It's not about money or workforce or the size of your home or your bedroom. It is about the people at the end of the day. And that's what we need to remember, especially moving forwards into the future. So I just want to say a huge thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. This is the Caring View. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. If you go to the care conferences, you will always find us there as well, giving our live episodes and in-person shows there. Tonight's show has been brought to you by the Care Start Room. Next week, we have got a sort of a roundtable chat around recruitment, top tips, and how we can approach recruitment in the best possible ways in social care. And I think that tonight's announcement of the NHS pay rise is quite timely. It gives us time to think of questions and think of how we need to consider that when we're recruiting in social care, because again, I think this will be another barrier to recruiting new talent into social care. But please do join us next week live at 7:30 on Tuesday. Until then, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Guests tonight, please don't disappear. We will say thank you once the credits have rolled. But for everyone else, we will see you later. Take care. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you next week. Good night.